And you turn the volume up on here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wassalatu wassalamu ala abdillahi wa rasulih nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So inshallah ta'ala we're going to be continuing with the weekly Q&A which is being done via Newcastle Central Mosque's live stream on Facebook. So inshallah ta'ala we'll continue with the questions that we hadn't managed to answer. There was a question 2 weeks ago, because last week was Eid. The week before Eid, there was a question about a woman praying in jilbab. And the questioner said that they came to understand that it's not required for a woman to pray in a jilbab. And the question was I don't have the exact wording of the question right here, but it was something close to that. Let me just get the exact wording here. That it's established by textual proofs and ijma' that it's not obligatory upon a woman in her prayer to wear the jilbab praying in her home. So I think here the difficulty, at least when I research this issue, is understanding what specific words actually mean and understanding what is meant when, for example, a scholar says it's not required for a woman to wear jilbab when she prays at home. What we have to look at here is, what is the awrah of a woman in the salah? That's a more precise question, because otherwise what will happen is when you come to look at things, you see that a scholar says, for example, it's not required for her to wear jilbab, and a person can misunderstand what the meaning behind that actually is. So I don't know of any difference of opinion among the scholars that a woman is required to cover in the salah her entire body except for her face and her hands, and there is some ikhtilaf regarding the feet. There is some difference of opinion regarding the feet, and the correct opinion is that she should cover her feet as well. It's not allowed for her feet to be uncovered. And I don't know any ikhtilaf between the scholars on that issue, broadly speaking. So I presume what happened to the person when they looked into this issue, and Allah knows best, I might be wrong about this, I might have misunderstood the question, but what might have been misunderstood by this is it required for her to wear the jilbab which she would wear outside of the home in order to pray? Is it required for her to do that or not? And here is where we come to the issue of what it's required for a woman to wear in the prayer. And it could be said that there is a difference between what a woman has to wear to go outside and what a woman has to wear to pray. It could be said there's a difference. But there is no difference of opinion that a woman has to cover her entire body with the exception of the face and the hands in order to pray. And we said the feet is a matter of disagreement. And the correct opinion is that she has to cover her feet as well. So if this is the case, then we understood that really this question about the jilbab is more a question on the specific piece of clothing which is used to cover the body. To the best of my knowledge, it's acceptable for her to wear in the home any piece of loose clothing which doesn't show the awrah. And this question was asked to Sheikh bin Baz rahimahullah ta'ala. And Sheikh bin Baz, he said, he was asked the question, is it permissible for a woman to pray in a, here it says jilbabun or fi jilbabin dayiq, in a narrow jilbab. And the original word of the word jilbab here is that it means a piece of clothing which covers the whole body. However, it doesn't show her awrah. It doesn't show her awrah. And it's not from the kind of material that shows the awrah. And she's wearing a headscarf. The Shaykh, he said, Na'am, as-salat sahih. Her prayer is correct. But he said it's better for her to pray in some clothing which is which is what's the word? Which is loose. Which is loose. And so here, I think that the question here, it might be a case that the question wasn't properly, the definition of the word jilbab here wasn't properly understood. Because I didn't find any difference of opinion that a woman has to cover her body in prayer. As the questioner suggested, that it's established by ijma' that she doesn't, then that's not correct. She has to cover her whole body in the prayer. And there is ijma' on this issue to the best of my knowledge. However, the issue is, does she have to wear the same jilbab that she wears to go outside? And I believe the answer to this is no, she doesn't. Providing it covers her body, the same conditions that we have for outside are not the same conditions for what she wears in the prayer. And I give you a practical example of this. It's often the case that women have prayer clothes that they pray in at home. And they might be, for example, colorful. They might not be the same that she would wear outside. And it covers her whole body, and it covers her head, and it covers her feet. Then there is no issue with this. I don't see there to be a problem in this. And it might not be the same jilbab that she would wear to pray outside, or she would wear to go outside. So that's to the best of what I can explain. So there was a question came on the side here about whether it's a choice to wear hijab or not. Not in terms of the prayer, no, definitely. Like the prayer has clothing for the prayer, for men and women. It's not just the case for men. For men, it's not just the case for women. For both men and women, there is specific guidelines regarding the clothing you can wear when you're praying. And obviously there are specific guidelines for the clothing you can wear in general. That's a different issue. But what I understood when I looked into this issue, and Allah knows best, is that I understood that what the issue which the questioner is alluding to here is it required for the woman to wear the same clothes she would wear to go outside? Is it required for her to pray in those same clothes? With all of the conditions. And this I don't think is the case. There is a difference between what she has to wear to pray and what she has to wear to go outside. There could be a difference between them. Even though for many people there isn't, they might wear the same thing. And Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. So hopefully that one, I'm not sure if I made it more easy to understand or more difficult. But anyway, if you're taking online classes of Arabic and Hadith, where the classes are interactive, can you continue with them in i'tikaf in the last 10 nights of Ramadan? Obviously this question was asked before or during the last 10 nights of Ramadan, but we're now outside of that time. But since I think it's still beneficial to answer questions about that because it might come up again in the future. First of all, i'tikaf can only be made in a masjid. So it's absolutely not acceptable for anyone to make i'tikaf at home. Coronavirus or no coronavirus, i'tikaf is in the masjid only. For men and for women, i'tikaf can only be done in the masjid. And so if a person is in a place where the masjid is open and they were able to make i'tikaf, then I personally, I think ideally they should stop those classes of Arabic and Hadith. I don't think it invalidates their i'tikaf if they do them. Inshallah ta'ala, it doesn't make the i'tikaf invalid. But at the same time, in terms of what i'tikaf is about and the sunan, the recommended acts of i'tikaf, I don't think it really goes along with taking online classes during that time. And the student should ask to be excused, inshallah. That would be the better option, inshallah. But I don't think it invalidates the i'tikaf if a person does it, inshallah ta'ala. So a person was asking about card games without dice. And this card game has a happy birthday card where all the players have to pay pretend money to that person. It's part of the game. And is this allowed? I personally really strongly advise people to avoid all of these kind of things. Avoid any games which have things in them that would be haram in real life, things that would be forbidden to do in real life, and things that would go against Islam, because doing things that would go against Islam as a joke in itself isn't really an excuse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, وَلَئِن سَأَلْتَهُمْ لَيَقُولَنَّ إِنَّمَا كُنَّا وَلَئِن سَأَلْتَهُمْ لَيَقُولُنَّ إِنَّمَا كُنَّا نَخُوضُ وَنَلْعَبُ. And if you ask them, they will say, we only were joking and playing. قُلْ أَبِاللَّهِ وَآيَاتِهِ وَرَسُولِهِ كُنْتُمْ بِهِ تَسْتَهْزِئُونَ. Say, is it Allah and His ayat and His messenger that you were making fun of? لَا تَعْتَذِرُوا قَدْ كَفَرْتُمْ بَعْدَ إِيمَانِكُمْ. Don't make any excuses. You have disbelieved after your belief. So the matter of doing things that might be a joke or a game or might be something that is, a person might take it like that it's just a joke or it's just a game, but really you can't do that when it comes to things that relate to Islam. You really can't do that. You can't do things for a joke or a game that would be considered to be sort of like that somebody's doing something to mock Islam or to make fun of Islam, and it's only a joke, it's only a game. So I think this ayah, generally speaking, can be used as a general evidence that saying something is a game isn't an excuse which is considered to be valid in Islam, or saying that it was a joke isn't an excuse for something to be valid in Islam. So I think that it's really important to avoid games that contain haram elements in general. And also this takes away from the remembrance of Allah Azza wa Jal. So I would advise that. As for the issue of chess, chess isn't what is mentioned in the ahadith. What is mentioned in the hadith is backgammon. And the word for backgammon is the same word used for chess, and that's where the confusion comes. But it seems to me that the word in the hadith that is mentioned in the ahadith is backgammon, not chess. However, there is an athar from Ali ibn Abi Talib about chess which indicates that it's not permissible. So that's why I would suggest that chess should be included along with that. Even though I think that the translation of the ahadith as to translating the word in the hadith as chess is slightly problematic, because it seems to me that it refers to backgammon, not chess. And the two words are the same word. In modern Arabic, the two words are the same. However, there is an athar from Ali ibn Abi Talib which is authentic. There is a report from Ali ibn Abi Talib, and I think that is enough. And I think the fact, the way that the shape of the chess pieces and so on, and the amount of time that it takes and the amount of distraction that it takes people away from Allah Azza wa Jal, I think including it in the prohibition is what makes them, is what appears to be the correct answer. And Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. What should be our attitude to seeking knowledge and having a career? Should it be you can only have one and you must pick between them? Or can a person have both at the same time? Should a serious student of knowledge abandon school, college and uni and just focus on seeking knowledge? Doesn't Islam tell us that we should seek a living too? I think the answer to this question, in all honesty, is not about whether you seek knowledge or have a career. It's about what your concern is and what your energy and motivation is towards. That's what I believe is the difference. If your energy and motivation is towards seeking knowledge, and the career is just something that is necessary to fulfill the basic needs in this life. At the end of the day, a person does a job because ultimately, we go out, we earn a living, it saves us from having to ask people for things, and it allows us to pay the zakah and give sadaqah, and it allows us to fulfill our obligation towards our family and so on. Then there is nothing wrong with this. But the person's concern, and the person's energy, and the person's motivation, the himmah, the thing that actually their goal and their dream, it shouldn't be career based. It should be knowledge based. I'm talking about the student of knowledge here. I'm not talking about everybody, because that's a different matter. But I'm talking about someone who says, I want to be a student of knowledge, and I want to seek knowledge, and I want to be a serious student. Then I don't think that's compatible with having big goals in terms of a career. It's compatible with the career being a sort of a necessary thing that you need to have, and that you have to the extent that it fulfills the need. And we've spoken previously on these Q&A sessions about zuhd, about abstaining from the dunya. And we've said that abstaining from the dunya effectively means only taking from the dunya what you need. And that's not compatible with having these big goals and dreams about a career, in the sense of that I'm going to be spending all my time studying for this career and then working for it and then trying to get promotion and then finally working out. That doesn't really go with the idea of being a student of knowledge and dedicating yourself to that. However, having a career, that's not an issue. In fact, I would suggest that having a career is way, way better than earning from dawah related activities. And I can honestly say that one of the biggest things people struggle with when they go and study is they struggle with what comes next. What do I do after I've graduated? Now what do I do? Where do I go? Should I get a career? And you get all kinds of like you have a big spectrum. So on one side you have some people who are working in da'wah full time and they earn their living through da'wah. That's what they do. On the other side you have some people working in a, like in a factory, working in a supermarket, and they don't get involved in da'wah at all. And you have every spectrum in between. Now, I don't believe it's wrong to earn a living from a da'wah related activity. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Inna ahaqqa ma akhadhtum alayhi al-ajr kitab Allah." He said that the most deserving thing, or kama qala sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the most deserving thing that you take a wage for is the book of Allah. I don't see that to be an issue. But I don't think it should be the default position. I don't think it should be what you aim for and strive for. Instead, I think a person should try to have a career or a skill, a profession. Maybe the word career is wrong. Maybe the word profession is better. Have a profession. Use that profession as much as they need to get by, and put all of their energy into study, and then use their profession to the best of their ability when they need it, and as much as they need it. There are some people who naturally end up in a situation where they're earning a living from da'wah. And I don't think those people necessarily have to change what they're doing, because that's not something they were seeking out. They weren't aiming for it or striving for it or targeting it. It just so happened that, for example, they were employed by an Islamic center or a masjid, and that was what Allah made easy for them. So I don't think that we need to tell those people they need to leave their job and they need to go start working in a factory somewhere because it's not allowed for you. No, but we would say that your ideal goal should be to seek knowledge and to have some sort of profession that fulfills your needs by the help of Allah Azza wa Jal, without you needing to ask other people. And I believe that this is whenever I've had a job which has involved earning money from a dawah related organization, I must admit it's never very comfortable. I've never found it very comfortable, to be honest, because you find that it's something that might be necessary at times, but it's never really comfortable. What you ideally want is you want a degree of independence that comes from having a simple profession that fulfills your needs. I think that's the best balance. But I don't think there's anything wrong with a person who works in a dawah related field if that's what Allah Azza wa Jal made easy for them. But there are some people who Allah made it easy for them to have a profession. And there are many examples of this. Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah ta'ala used to repair watches, rahmatullahi alayh. Shaykh Muhammad Amin al-Shanqiti rahimahullah ta'ala, he used to, if I'm not mistaken, he used to make thiyab, be like a tailor or some job related like that, something similar to that. So there are many examples, even in relatively modern times, of mashayikh and ulama. They had a profession. And there are examples of ulama who didn't. There are examples of ulama who were able to, they were sponsored by one of the governments or by a university or by an Islamic institution. That can happen sometimes, but I think it shouldn't be your goal or your aim. But a person's goal should be to seek knowledge. If that's what they want to dedicate their life to, that should be the goal that is more important. And that means that, things relating to a career have to come second. You can't have kind of two burning priorities that you fulfill equally at the same time. One of them has to come in front of the other one. And Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. Can you elaborate regarding the hijrah? Some scholars say that it's haram for a Muslim to move to a non-Muslim country. But in the West, such as the UK, we have generations of Muslims from Muslim countries. Is it wrong for these Muslims to have moved to the West? And if we say it's wrong, perhaps many people in the West have reverted to Islam due to these immigrant Muslims. So how would you respond to this? I think there's a few different issues we have to take out of this question. The first thing is, it's not really correct for us, and we can't use the qadr of Allah as an evidence for the permissibility of something in the Sharia. And what I mean by that is, a person, what they do is they say, Allah decreed for this person to come to the UK. And when they came to the UK, so-and-so became a Muslim. Allah decreed for them to become a Muslim. Or they came to the UK, they started practicing Islam. And then they use that as a dalil for an evidence for the permissibility of doing so in Islam. And that doesn't make any sense. You can't, the fact that people came to the UK and then people became Muslim, or people came to the UK and started practicing, it doesn't prove the permissibility or the impermissibility of coming to the UK. It doesn't give you a proof for or against. And that's, we see some examples like that. Like some people, for example, they might say, I became Muslim when I did, for example, let's just say as an example, someone says, I became Muslim when I had a Muslim girlfriend. And because of that Muslim girlfriend, I became Muslim. Should we then say that having a boyfriend and girlfriend is permissible because of this? No, you can't use what Allah decreed to happen in terms of the qadr of Allah and what He decreed to happen. You can't use that as an evidence for what is allowed or not allowed in Islam. And from the evidences for this is the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَنْصُرُ هَذَا الدِّينَ بِالرَّجُلِ الْفَاجِرِ أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم, that Allah will support this religion through a wicked man. Does that mean that it's permissible to be wicked, to be a tyrant, to be evil towards people? No, but that doesn't mean that Allah Azza wa Jal can't bring good out of something which is bad. So here, I don't think we can use the fact that some people got guidance when they came to the West, or that some people came to the West and they were a reason for people to become Muslim. That doesn't make it good or bad. It's not a proof for or against, because that's just what happened. That's just the events that happened. But it doesn't indicate, that doesn't give us a proof in Islam to tell us that what they did was right or wrong. It doesn't help us in any way. So that's the first part. The next question is the issue of hijrah. And hijrah is, there are two types of hijrah in Islam. One is to leave a place of disbelief for a place of belief. So to leave a place of disbelief, like the situation of the Muslims in Mecca in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Mecca in that time was a place of disbelief, and they traveled to Medina and they lived there, and that is an example of moving from a place of disbelief to a place of belief. Also included in hijrah is moving from a place of disbelief to a place of disbelief which is better for that particular Muslim, and it allows them to practice their religion better. So for example, someone is in a place of disbelief, and that place that they're in is, they're oppressed in it and they're suffering, and they move to another country which is not a Muslim country, but it's better for them than the first place was. And the example of this hijrah is the hijrah to Abyssinia, when the Muslims, they moved from Mecca to Abyssinia in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, in the early days of the da'wah, the call to Islam. They moved from Mecca to Abyssinia. Abyssinia wasn't a Muslim country, it was a Christian country. But the Christian ruler of Abyssinia, Najashi, who later accepted Islam, rahimahullah ta'ala, at that time it was not a Muslim country, but he was kind towards the Muslims, and that was a kind of hijrah. In terms of moving from a Muslim country to a non-Muslim country, then I don't think this should ever be done unless there is a valid reason for it. And there can be different reasons for that. And if it is that someone visits these countries, and let them do so temporarily, and let them do so for a particular reason, like a goal. Like I'm not just coming here because of the dunya, like I'm coming here because I have a particular goal that I want to achieve. But it may be that some people come to the UK because the situation for them in their country is actually worse than the situation that they would have if they came to the UK. So I don't think it's easy to make a blanket statement and say that everyone who came to the UK was wrong, or that people should not worry about it and should just come without any concern. I think that it's down to an individual situation. I don't think we should be encouraging people generally to leave Muslim countries and move to non-Muslim countries, no matter how difficult the Muslim countries might be. I don't think that we should be encouraging people to do that. But at the same time, different situations are for different people. And it's very difficult to make a blanket statement which covers everybody, because there are some people who leave because of a war, some people who were being persecuted in their country, some people who had, for example, very extreme difficulties, and they were not able to move to a Muslim country, but they were able to move to a non-Muslim country that was relatively open and relatively considerate of their religion. As for staying in a non-Muslim country on a permanent basis, it's difficult to justify staying in a non-Muslim country for anyone. Whether you're born in that country, whether you're from that country, it doesn't matter. It's very difficult to justify staying in a non-Muslim country on a permanent basis. However, we also realize that not everyone will be able to make hijrah. Not everyone will be able to leave. I wouldn't like to think, or I wouldn't like to think that a person would live their entire life in a non-Muslim country and not have a goal or a dream of moving to a Muslim country. But that dream might not be possible for everybody, and not everyone it's easy for them, especially in the time that we live in today, with visas and passports and all kinds of these issues. It's not like it used to be where you can just get up and go to another country and just, find a place there. Now the situation isn't easy. A lot of places you go to a Muslim country, you have to leave after a couple of years and come back again because of visa restrictions, because of work issues. But I think that generally speaking, a Muslim should have a goal to live in a Muslim country. And a person might say, they might say that, what about if the Muslim country isn't as open or as friendly towards us practicing Islam as the non-Muslim country, for example? But in my experience, I don't think that in most places, I can't say that I've seen every place, but in most places, you can't compare life in a Muslim country to life in a non-Muslim country. Life in a Muslim country will always be better for a Muslim. No matter what restrictions or difficulties there are, it's very, very difficult to imagine a situation where it wouldn't be better. At the same time, every situation has its own rulings, so I don't think it's an easy question to give you a blanket answer to say everyone who came to the UK was wrong, or everyone still living in the UK is wrong. I think that each person has a unique situation and each person has to look at themselves, but I would say in general, I wouldn't advise people en masse living in Muslim countries to plan to come and live in the UK. And I also wouldn't suggest, or I would also strongly encourage, perhaps that's better to put it that way, I would strongly encourage people who are living in non-Muslim countries right now to make an intention to try to move to a Muslim country at some point if Allah Azza wa Jal makes it easy for them and to do their best to try and make that happen. And Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. There's some questions, sometimes I might skip a question, but not because I don't want to answer it, but just because I might not have the answer available to me right now. So sometimes I skip a question or two. Okay, so it was an interesting question here. A question was asked from someone in school. What do you do if you're in a group of people in school, like your teacher has put you into a group, and someone swears or says something bad about Allah or about a prophet? Are you guilty because of the ayah in Surah An-Nisa? And I'll just put up the ayah that the person referenced. The statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, وَقَدْ نَزَّلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الْكِتَابِ أَنْ إِذَا سَمِعْتُمْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ يُكْفَرُ بِهَا أَوْ يُسْتَهْزَأُ بِهَا فَلَا تَقْعُدُوا مَعَهُمْ حَتَّى يَخُوضُوا فِي حَدِيثٍ غَيْرِهِ إِنَّكُمْ إِذًا مِثْلُهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ جَامِعُ الْمُنَافِقِينَ وَالْكَافِرِينَ فِي جَهَنَّمَ جَمِيعًا. And it's been revealed to you in the book that when you hear the verses of Allah recited and someone is denying them or ridiculing them, do not sit with them until they enter into another conversation. You would be like them. Indeed, Allah will gather the hypocrites and the disbelievers in hell all together. I think it's an excellent question. And it could definitely happen that somebody is in a group in maybe in school, or they're asked to work, maybe at work even, a group of people. And in that group of people, one of the people, like the habit now, people, subhanAllah, they don't think about what they say. And the person says, swears about Allah or about one of the prophets, and so on. And then how do you respond to that, or how do you manage that? And how do you avoid being like them because you're still sitting with them in that group? I think the first thing is that if you can distance yourself from them in that situation, that's what you have to do. You have to distance yourself from them. You can rebuke them for what they say, like in a sensible way. Like say, look, I would appreciate if you don't speak like that. Whatever you want to say in your own, whatever you say among yourselves, it's not my responsibility. But ultimately, I don't want to be here when you're using that kind of language, and I find it disrespectful to my religion for you to be using that kind of language in front of me. And if they don't listen, raise the issue with the teacher or the manager or whatever it is, if it's at work. Raise the issue with them. And I think if you do your very best, you say something, if you're able to say something, and you're able to say something to them. Say to them, don't talk like that. And if they still persist, say to them that don't talk like that. I find it very disrespectful to me personally. I find that kind of language disrespectful. I don't like it. And if they continue to use that kind of language, then raise it with the teacher or raise it with the supervisor or whatever it might be. Because ultimately, generally speaking, that kind of language shouldn't be tolerated in a school anyway. Even if the school is atheist inclined or whatever, the kind of swearing and really bad language and stuff like that, it shouldn't be generally tolerated in a school or in a work environment anyway. If you raise it with the teacher and you say to the teacher that, look, this for me, it's not acceptable, and I can't be sitting with these people. Can you, if you won't change their behavior, or if you won't punish them for the behavior, then at least can you move me to a different group? That's what I would do. And I think if a person does their best, Allah Azza wa Jalla said, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Fear Allah as much as you can. A person does their best. Distance yourself from them. And then ultimately, even if you walk out of that group, if the teacher doesn't do it, and you walk out of that group and just refuse to take part, what's the worst that's going to happen to you? Detention, you're going to ask to make lines, or hand in extra homework or something like that. It's worth it at the end of the day. If that's all you can do is just distance yourself from them and just say, fine, I'm not going to take part in this group. I'm not gonna take part in a group if they're gonna use that kind of language. But ultimately, it's not easy for me to understand because I don't know. This question wasn't sent from the UK, so I'm not quite sure what the schools would be like from the place where the questioner was asking. But I presume that kind of language, generally the teacher wouldn't tolerate it. I would expect. The only situation where I would say the answer would be different is if you think that by complaining they're going to do it more. And if you think by complaining they're going to do it more, it's better for you to be silent. Be silent and distance yourself from it. Just be silent and just switch off. Just completely distance yourself, like mentally, just basically switch off from them. But I don't think it's a good idea. If you think they're going to do it more, then I would recommend you don't tell anyone or complain about it. You could try rebuking them in a way they won't do it more, like just saying to them, oh, don't say that, that's not good, don't speak like that. But if you think they're going to do it more, then I think in this case, the general rule about forbidding evil is if you're going to forbid an evil and it's going to make a situation that's worse than the one that you were trying to deal with, then it's not permissible to forbid the evil in that situation. So if you think it's just going to get worse, just let it go and hate it in your heart. And just physically, as much as you can, distance yourself, like even if you just switch off, there's always someone in the group like that. You see people just, they're not interested in what the group has to say and they just switch off and, just basically ignore everybody. Then if that's the best you can do. But this is some of the issues with living in the West and, being in these kind of schools and things like that. And I think parents have to take that seriously. They have to look at alternatives for their children when their children are experiencing these kind of situations, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. When I was younger and started practicing, I was eager about Islam. However, many times I would give da'wah in incorrect or bad ways, lack of knowledge and maturity. Now that I'm older and I understand, I become sad thinking about my past and I don't interact with many of the same people I would give da'wah to out of embarrassment. I rarely talk about Islam to anyone anymore unless someone initiates a conversation with me. What's your advice for me? Wallah, my advice honestly is to make a lot of istighfar. Ask Allah Azza wa Jal to forgive you. The Prophet ﷺ said, طُوبَى لِمَنْ وَجَدَ فِي صَحِيفَتِهِ إِسْتِغْفَارًا كَثِيرًا أو كما قال. He said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, paradise will be for the one who finds lots of istighfar in his scrolls. And to be honest, I would say the same thing about myself. When I was younger and started practicing, I also many times gave da'wah in incorrect ways, many times said things that I shouldn't have said, many times was overzealous, many times said things that were not without knowledge. That's, subhanAllah, something that almost everybody involved in da'wah will experience. I don't advise you to stop giving da'wah because that's neither is it correcting the issue, it's not making up for the problem, and it's not making it better in any way. There's no way that it's making it better. It's making it's causing, or it's a negative, whichever way you look at it. Continue giving da'wah. Now that you have knowledge and you know how you should be doing it and you understood what you did wrong, now continue giving da'wah in the right way, inshallah. And that's how you make up for things you did wrong in the past. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned an authentic hadith. He said, وَأَتْبِعْ السَّيِّئَةَ الْحَسَنَةَ تَمْحُهَا. Follow up the bad deed with a good deed, it will wipe it out. But he didn't say follow up the bad deed with silence, or follow up the bad deed by not doing anything. Follow up a bad deed with a good deed. So I would advise the person not to stop giving da'wah, but simply to show their maturity and their knowledge that they've acquired, and to keep on seeking it, because ultimately, every time you learn, the more you learn, you realize how ignorant you used to be. And Imam al-Shafi'i said this. He said, كُلَّمَا أَدَّبَنِ الدَّهْرُ أَرَانِي نَقْصَ أَقْلِي وَإِذَا مَا زِدْتُ عِلْمًا زَادَنِي عِلْمًا بِجَهْلِ. He said, all the time that I'm just corrected by the passage of time. Time goes by and I realize I made a mistake about that. Then some more time goes by and I realize I made a mistake about that. Then some more time goes by and I realize I made a mistake about something else. It just shows me how deficient my intellect is. And every time I increase in knowledge, it only increases me in knowledge of how ignorant I used to be. That's everybody in da'wah experiences that. Everyone who's trying to learn, everyone who's trying to share Islam with people, every single person experiences this. You learn more and you realize how ignorant you used to be. You learn more and you realize how wrong what you used to do was. And that's a mercy from Allah Azza wa Jal that you actually learned that. So all it requires is two things. First of all, istighfaran kathira, lots of istighfar. And that should make your heart feel lighter. You should feel less sad, less depressed by making istighfar. And the second thing is, it requires you to make up for those bad things by doing good things. And ideally, if you can do the same thing you were doing but do it in the right way, then this is an excellent way of making up for the things that were wrong before. But ultimately, I believe this is something that nearly everybody in da'wah experiences. Illa man rahim Allah, except the one Allah has mercy on. Nearly everybody experiences this. So it shouldn't stop you from giving da'wah, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. As Muslims, part of the good etiquette is showing good manners and gentleness to non-Muslims. However, in many parts of the Quran, it's very stern against non-Muslims with very harsh words against them, such as the ayah telling us to be harsh against them. And I feel like they get a mixed message when they speak to Muslims versus when they read the Quran. And can you provide some clarification on this? I think this is an excellent question. And I think that the principle that you need is that the Quran complements itself, it doesn't contradict itself. That's the principle you need. So we have two texts. And how do we approach two texts that are seemingly contradictory? Let's just give an example. In the example that the questioner mentioned. The questioner mentioned the ayah in Surah At-Tawbah. I believe the ayah that is being referenced is وَلْيَجِدُوا مِنْكُمْ غِلْظَةً. I think that's the ayah that's been mentioned, but I'll check the reference. Is this the ayah that the person was asking about? No, the ayah the person was asking about was يَا أَيُّهَا النَّبِيُّ جَاهِدِ الْكُفَّارَ وَالْمُنَافِقِينَ وَاغْلُظْ عَلَيْهِمْ وَمَأْوَاهُمْ جَهَنَّمْ وَبِئْسَ الْمَصِيرُ. O Prophet, fight against the disbelievers and the hypocrites. وَاغْلُظْ عَلَيْهِمْ, and be stern with them, be harsh with them. And their place is Jahannam, and what an evil destination. So the person asks, how do you reconcile that with the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal? For example, the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, in Surah Al-Mumtahana, for example. The statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين ولم يخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إليهم إن الله يحب المقسطين. Allah does not forbid you from those who did not fight against you because of your religion, or expel you from your homes for being righteous towards them and acting justly towards them. Indeed, Allah loves those who act justly. So, the question here is, you have two ayat that are seemingly contradictory. They're not contradictory because the ayat of the Quran never contradict each other. But you can't find it in the first instance, you struggle to reconcile. That doesn't mean everybody struggles to reconcile. Some people might hear those two ayat and think the answer is obvious, that's so easy. Everyone can understand that. But some people might struggle to reconcile between them. So this is something that we deal with in Islam a lot, where we have two texts that are authentic. Both of them are authentic. They could be ayat of the Quran, they could be hadith, could be one ayah, one hadith. And we can't immediately find a way to reconcile between them. So the first thing that we do is obviously to begin with, if it's a hadith, establish the authenticity, because if it's not authentic, then that's your easiest option. You realize one is authentic, one is not. But here we're talking about two ayat of the Quran. Both of them are ayahs from the Quran, so it's not an issue of authenticity. We've got no problem with authenticity right here. Okay, so now what do? The first thing is we look at how did the scholars join between them, or maybe we could put it a different way. Is it possible to join between them and to take both? Because, like the scholars say, joining between an evidence or reconciling between an evidence or two evidences, reconciling is always given precedence over taking one and leaving the other. Inshallah, you understand now that reconciling is always given precedence over taking one evidence and leaving the other one. So I have a choice. I can either take the ayah in Surah At-Tawbah, be harsh against them, or I can take the ayah in Surah Al-Mumtahina, that there's no harm in being just towards them and righteous towards them and kind towards them. Okay, which one do I take? Do I take the one in Surah Al-Mumtahina and leave the one in Surah At-Tawbah? Or do I take the one in Surah At-Tawbah and leave the one in Surah Al-Mumtahina? The answer is, if it's possible to take them both, then that's what I need to do. So I go back to the scholars of Quran and I look at how did they reconcile between these two. And we see that there's a very simple way of reconciling between these two. Is to say that each ayah has a particular situation or a particular set of people that it's applied to. It has a particular situation and a particular set of people that it's applied to. If you apply this ayah to this set of people, then you apply this ayah to this set of people. Or if this ayah applies in this situation, then this ayah applies in another situation. We can't just guess those out of our, just make a guess or, let me try and figure it out. You've got to go back and look at how the early generations of Muslims understood. But you'll see that they reconciled between these ayat. And they found that one of them applies to a particular group of people or a particular situation, and another one applies to a different group of people, a different situation. So that being said as a principle, now we come to the issue at hand. How do we as Muslims deal with non-Muslims? Are we soft and gentle? Are we harsh? Are we fighting, not fighting? Are we being, kind and considerate or not? How do we deal with this? The reality is that there are many different situations in which a Muslim can find themselves, and there are many different responses that are required for those different situations. And I'll give an example of that. The difference when a person is, for example, in a situation where there is a war between those two groups of people and they're fighting each other, and a situation where there isn't a war between those two people. Those two are not going to have the same response, the same behavior is not going to be there, for example. A situation where the person that you're dealing with is generally hasn't done anything against you, they haven't done anything wrong to you, so you're not going to do anything wrong to them. A situation where that person has done a great wrong towards you or towards other Muslims and has tried to harm them and has driven them out of their homes, that's also not going to be the same either. A situation where the Muslims are in a position of strength and control versus a situation where the Muslims are in a situation of weakness and being a minority is also not going to be the same way of dealing with people. So ultimately, each situation has a way of dealing with people, and each of the different ayat of the Quran talk about different situations. But one thing that I will say that has to be understood is that in Islam, there is a concept, and this concept is a fundamental part of Islam, which is the concept of al-wala wal-bara, the concept that allegiance and our support is always to the Muslims. Our allegiance is always to Islam and the Muslims. And that is something that I don't think as a Muslim you should have to apologize for, or you should have to kind of hide it or hide away from it. ultimately your allegiance is to Islam and the Muslims. That's what Islam requires from every single Muslim. It doesn't mean that you can't treat people well, it doesn't mean you can't be kind, it doesn't mean you can't be considerate, it doesn't mean you can't be good to your neighbor, it doesn't mean that you can't look after the people in the community, but ultimately at the end of the day, the person who you have that allegiance for is your fellow Muslim. And I believe that this concept of al-wala wal-bara, really, it shouldn't be even something foreign to, even outside of Islam. It's something that exists in many different religions and also in many different countries, where your first allegiance is towards, for example, the people from your country, or your first allegiance is towards the people from your religion. Those are the people who are truly with you, And ultimately, other people have a right to kindness, good treatment, consideration, providing they're not fighting against you or trying to hurt you. They have every right to you. Be kind, considerate, explain to them, be gentle with them, help them out. If they ask you for something that's not prohibited in Islam, why not? There's nothing prohibited about that. But ultimately, they have to understand that your allegiance and the people that you are ultimately have that affinity and that closeness with, that's for Islam and the Muslims. And I think that's something that is very, very clearly explained in the Quran. Now, one of the things the questioner alluded to, which I believe is very true, is the fact that non-Muslims get very confused about Islam because of the fact that we as Muslims give out these mixed messages. And it's not the fault of the Quran. The Quran doesn't give out any mixed messages. The Quran is very clear. But we as Muslims tend to try to sweeten Islam a bit too much, in the sense that we try to take things and take them out of context in order to make Islam seem maybe more appealing to somebody, or to try and bring them towards Islam in a certain way. And that's not right. At the end of the day, you have to present Islam as it is. فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. Whoever wants to accept it, let them believe. And whoever doesn't want to accept it, let them disbelieve. Each one is going to have the answer to, each one will have a recompense or a judgment in the afterlife as to what they did. But ultimately, it's not for you to change the rules of Islam or the laws of Islam to try and get someone to come into Islam. Yes, you can explain things to people in a way they can understand. Yes, you should explain to people Islam in a way they can understand it. But you shouldn't be kind of sugarcoating things and trying to kind of detract away from concepts in Islam, because you think that if the person knew what Islam really said about this, they would run away. Ultimately, I don't think that's true. Islam is a religion that it makes perfect sense and it doesn't push people away. But I think that it's the case that many times there are Muslims who try in giving da'wah to explain things to people, and they often are somewhat economical with the truth in order to try to get that person to come closer to Islam. And that's not the right approach. It's not the way the Prophet ﷺ did it. He didn't try to take away from the rights of Islam, or take away from the message of Islam, or just kind of customize it to different people. At the end of the day, you have to tell people what Islam really says, and then let them understand the reason why, and let them understand the concept. So for me, I think that what the questioner alluded to is, it is the case that many times people talk about Islam or present Islam to people, and they leave people confused, because they go back, they take the Quran, they read the Quran, they say, but what you're saying and what the Quran is saying doesn't seem to make sense. Sometimes that's not the fault of the person giving the message. Sometimes it's the case that the person just isn't able to reconcile between these different ayat and these different situations. But when you understand that the Quran was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ over a period of 23 years, in that 23 years, the Muslims went through all different situations. They went through a situation where they were oppressed, in the minority. They went through situations where they were in the majority and they were in control. They went through situations where they were not allowed or able to fight. They were completely basically just forced to have patience and just let things go. And they went through situations where they fought against their enemies. And each of the ayat of the Quran were revealed about particular situations and particular circumstances. Then this becomes easier for a person to reconcile. Then you have to ask the question, how many of those rulings remain and how many of the rulings no longer apply? Like for example, the rulings in the early time in Mecca, some of those rulings don't apply. Like they have been superseded by other rulings that came after them. So you have to also take that into account as well. So that's the best way that I can explain this particular question. And Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. Okay, there was a very good question. It was a very long question, but I think this one would be best to deal with it, inshallah. Again, like maybe the person left their email address, so maybe that would be better to deal with by email, inshallah. Okay, that question also, I'm gonna delay it for later. Sometimes. Okay, what's the ruling on wiping over cotton socks for wudu? When I go to work, I find it embarrassing to be found washing my feet in the sink. Yeah, I can completely understand that. I also think it's not ideal to have like a hand sink at work, which is for washing your hands, and then you find that, the Muslim guy with his foot in the sink. It's not ideal, right? So I think, first of all, there is no issue wiping over cotton socks, inshallah ta'ala. There is no issue wiping over cotton socks. And I personally don't think that there's any major restrictions on this, like that they have to be of a certain thickness or something like that. But I mean, they should cover the foot, and they should not be so thin that you can see the foot through them. That's in an ideal situation. But yeah, like regular cotton socks, there is no problem in wiping over them, inshallah. Can you recommend any du'as, ayat, and worship to stop you from binge eating on junk foods and addictive self-destructive behaviors, especially when feeling low? Well, that's a very good question. It's not a bad question at all. The reason it made me smile is I was thinking that I really need this question on a personal sort of level, that subhanallah, there's no doubt that, and I think one of the things people maybe don't realize, it's very famous, the hadith of a third for food and a third for air and a third for water. A lot of people mention this hadith, but they don't mention that this hadith, the third that is for air and food and water, isn't the target. That's the maximum allowed. The Prophet ﷺ, what he indicated is, if a person cannot do anything except that, if they have no choice but to eat that much, then the maximum that they should eat is a third for food and a third for water and a third for air. As for a person who that third is considered to be their, like that's their diet, they're on a diet when they're eating a third for food and a third of water and a third of air, that's like, that's not the intended meaning of the hadith. The hadith mentions the few morsels that you put in your mouth that keep your back straight. So it's definitely something all of us need to improve on and pay attention to. In terms of du'as, there is one that is within the du'as that you say every morning and every evening. And that is the du'a, Allahumma afini fi badani, Allahumma afini fi sam'i, Allahumma afini fi basari, la ilaha illa ant. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-kufri wal-faqr, وأعوذ بك من عذاب القبر لا إله إلا أنت. And this dua you say it 3 times in the morning and 3 times in the evening. It's in Fortress of the Muslim. That, oh Allah, give me al-afiyah in my body. And al-afiyah is a general word for being saved from all kinds of sicknesses and problems and troubles. So I think it can be included in this. Anything like a person becoming sick, or a person like the questioner mentioned, like just binging on junk food and stuff like that, and then becoming that it affects your ibadah. You're not able to pray properly. You're not able to worship Allah Azza wa Jal. You end up not being able to perform the acts of worship that you would want to because of the eating habits that you have. And so I think this is a very appropriate dua. And generally, this is one of the things you see about the du'as of the Prophet ﷺ. You see that these du'as are often general and comprehensive. Because the Prophet ﷺ was given jawami' al-kalim. He was given comprehensive speech. He was able to say a great many things with few words. And that's why this word, Allahumma afini fi badani, it just covers everything. Anything that can go wrong with your body, any kind of affliction, any kind of sickness, asking Allah to keep you away from it. And Ibn Rajab, rahimahullah ta'ala, Ibn Rajab, rahimahullah, he mentioned that overeating is a kind of disability. It's a kind of something that a person should be considered to have a disability if they've overeaten so much that they've become overweight, that this should be considered to be a kind of a disability for a person, because it stops you from worshipping Allah Azza wa Jal. And it causes you health problems. It shortens your what's the word? The quality of your life decreases. The fact that you become sick, you have health complications, you're not able to worship Allah Azza wa Jal. So no doubt, asking Allah for al-afiyah, asking Allah to keep you safe from the afflictions that afflict a person's body, there is no doubt that this is included in it. And I think studying the Sunnah and having an appreciation for the Sunnah also can help. When you study the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ and you study the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ with regard to eating and how he used to eat, inshallah this can also help as well. I think the problem is that we've become, or we're inside of a culture where eating has become like a major means of pleasure, like a major means of just people eating for the sake of, you only have to look at, like how social media is just full of, basically just different people, recipes, and, make this and make, and some of that can be beneficial if it's to a limit. But you see that it's become now where people eat huge amounts of food for the pleasure of eating, not because they actually need to keep their back straight or they want to actually stay healthy or something like that. They're just eating purely for the pleasure of it again and again and again, and overeating. And that's something that, subhanAllah, when you look at the Sunnah, you see the danger of it. You might think of it as a small issue, and we as Muslims might consider it to be something small, something minor. But actually, subhanAllah, it really can affect your life in a way that really affects your worship and really affects your ability to worship Allah Azza wa Jal. So I think it's something that we should definitely study and look at and try to implement. In terms of self-destructive behaviors, I think one of the greatest things a person can do is to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah Azza wa Jal, He said, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا إِذَا مَسَّهُمْ طَائِفٌ مِّنَ الشَّيْطَانِ تَذَكَّرُوا فَإِذَا هُمْ مُبْصِرُونَ Surah Al-A'raf. Allah Azza wa Jal said, those people who have taqwa of Allah, when they are touched by an affliction from the shaitan, they remember. Some of the scholars said they remember Allah, and then they can see clearly. Remembering Allah Azza wa Jal helps to overcome those kind of self-destructive behaviors and things people do like addictions. Wallahi, a lot of it can be overcome by remembering Allah Azza wa Jal, and by having high aspirations and lofty goals, and having your focus and your attention on Islam. You can overcome a lot of self-destructive and negative behaviors, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. Will you ever look into making a detailed curriculum for those who want to homeschool their kids? Or does such a curriculum already exist? I'm not sure how much already exists. I know there are things that exist for sure. Typically in terms of Islamic projects, the problem that we have is that we have a lot of people working on little bits of things, and then it's difficult to kind of find it all in one place. It's something that I hope to work on. I started working on it and then stopped working on it, and then started working on it, stopped working on it again. And subhanAllah, that's one of the problems I personally have, is that almost every project I have is always like half finished, 3/4 finished, and it never quite gets to the finish line. That's something I need to correct about myself. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. I think it needs to be done. I don't think that it's been done in a way that's comprehensive yet. So if there are people who have the ability to do that, like for example, there are teachers or there are people who have the ability, I think I would recommend anyone to start, but with one condition. I would recommend that if someone starts doing this, that you make it open for other people to correct and add to. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see at the moment is people start these projects and they make them closed. So they make it so that no one else can actually make any recommendations or corrections to the work that they've done. And that's why one of the things I've been personally trying to do with some of the charity work that I've been doing is trying to make the work that we do open. And I haven't been doing a very good job of it, I'll be honest, but I'm still trying. And that is to make work more open. You know, like if you put forward a curriculum for people, put a curriculum out there and allow people to suggest things. Obviously, you can retain control of that, like an open source model where you can retain control. You don't have to give control over to people that anyone can edit. It's not Wikipedia where anyone can edit anything. But where people have a means where people can suggest changes to you. So the model that I like the best is I really like the kind of GitHub type of model, like open source type of model that they use in coding, where people can just download your work, make changes, and then send you requests, and you can either accept the request or deny it. You can either say, yeah, I agree with that and I'm going to accept it and incorporate it, because ultimately if I make a curriculum, it might be strong from a certain angle. It might be strong from an Islamic angle, it might be strong from certain subjects that I maybe understand better than others, but in other areas it's going to be weak, and there's going to be professional teachers that look at it and say, educators, people who write curricula, who look at it and say, yeah, it's not good enough. If those people have a means to contribute and then they say, I would change this, this and this, as long as I retain control over it, not in the sense of being like a control freak, but in the sense of I still have the ability to say to someone, no, I'm not happy with that change, I don't agree with it. But ultimately that kind of open source model, that's what I think it should be done for this type of curriculum. Let someone work on it, but let other people contribute to it. So use something like GitHub or something like that, where people can contribute and people can recommend and suggest things, and it can grow like that as a community effort, instead of just being one person puts a curriculum out there and it's like take it or leave it. Yeah, that's what I think might be a better model for this, and it's something that is on my list of half-finished projects, which I hope and pray that one day will not be half-finished, inshallah. It's a very, very good question, but I want to leave that question till next time because it needs a bit more research. Okay, it's a very, very, very good question here. I like this question. To kind of summarize it, there are some Islamic speakers who've been saying that Islam promotes a plant-based diet, and people are always talking about giving up meat and things like that. Does Islam encourage eating less meat, or is it the opposite? I think that the message that should come across from Islam is that there are certain things that Islam clearly encourages with regard to eating. And there are many things that Islam didn't specify. Because Islam isn't a diet plan. Islam wasn't revealed as a means for you to eat a particular diet. Islam came with goals that are more important than that. So Islam gave clear guidelines with regard to food and left many things open. From the guidelines that Islam came to food is to eat as little as you need to keep your back straight. In other words, to eat what you need to be healthy and not to eat any more than that. And if you must eat more than that, then not to go more than a third of your stomach capacity in food, and a third in water, and a third for air. That's a clear rule that Islam came with. There are rules and etiquettes about eating Islam came with. And there are things that are haram to eat. Allah Azza wa Jal told us, for example, حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمُ الْمَيْتَةُ وَالدَّمُ وَلَحْمُ الْخِنْزِيرِ وَمَا أُهِلَّ بِهِ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ. That forbidden for you is the dead animal and the meat of the pig and blood and what has been sacrificed to other than Allah. These are things that have come clearly, Islam has come clearly with. But Islam didn't clearly bring us a specific diet. And whatever the Prophet ﷺ ate, it wasn't as a revelation. The Prophet ﷺ didn't eat dates as an act of revelation. He ate dates as an aada, as a custom. That was the custom of his people, and he ate what his people ate. Now, it's not to say that dates aren't blessed, because we have evidences in the Quran that the date is a blessed fruit. There's no problem with that. We have evidences for that in the Sunnah, that dates are a blessed fruit. But we don't have, it's not the case that the Prophet ﷺ ate certain foods in order to prove a particular diet to us or show us a particular diet. So I don't think Islamic speakers should promote any diet, to be honest, in the sense of plant-based or non-plant-based, because this is not something that Islam came with. Islam left it open. If you want to have a plant-based diet, you can have a plant-based diet. If you want to eat nothing but meat, you can eat nothing but meat. If you want to go low carb, you can go low carb. Islam didn't prohibit or encourage any of that. Rather, Islam, generally speaking, all the food is halal except what Allah Azza wa Jal made haram. And what Allah made haram, we have to keep away from. And we're not allowed to fill up our stomach to the full. That is basically the rules on eating that Islam came with, on what you eat. As for the rest, Islam didn't come with that. And it's not fair to attribute that to Islam. It's not fair to say, for example, that the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't light a fire in his house for 3 months. And that means that he used to eat a plant-based diet. The Prophet ﷺ was forced. He didn't have a choice. It wasn't the case that he said, oh, I'm going to go vegan for 3 months. The Prophet ﷺ didn't have a choice. Salawatullahi wasalamu alayhi. His goal, his aim in this dunya was more than whether he ate a vegan diet or a meat-based diet. That wasn't what the Prophet ﷺ came with. And so it's not fair or right for any Islamic speaker to claim that Islam recommended any particular diet or any particular eating plan other than the things which you have a clear evidence for. So I don't think it's right for us to speculate on that. There were times when the Prophet ﷺ ate meat when it was available. There were times when the Prophet ﷺ didn't have any meat available, so the only thing that he could do, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was to eat dates and water. Salawatullahi wasalamu alayhi. Does that say to us that we should cycle between a meat-based and a plant-based diet? It doesn't tell us anything like that, because that wasn't a part of the revelation. It was the custom of the Prophet ﷺ, and it was the situation that the Prophet ﷺ was in. That's all it was. So we can't really read anything more into it than that. If you want to go on any particular diet, providing that diet doesn't break the laws and rules of Islam, then there's nothing wrong with that at all, inshallah, and you can do whatever you want as long as it doesn't break the laws of Islam or the rules of Islam in any way. There's nothing wrong with any particular diet. But there is an issue which needs some research. Is it allowed for a person to restrict a particular food which is halal permanently? So for a person to say, I'm a vegan and I will never ever eat animal-based products, to what extent is that allowed? And what extent is it not allowed? If a person says it's not religiously, like I believe it's halal to eat meat, but I personally have made a promise to myself that I will never eat meat, for example. Well, I don't think that this requires some research on it, to give the boundaries of it. I will try to remember. I'll put it on my list things to research. It requires some research as to whether a person can make a statement like that. But temporarily, a person says, like, I want to, give up eating meat for a few months for diet reasons, for health reasons. Islam doesn't have anything to say about that, as long as you don't make it a part of Islam. And that's why it's wrong for the Islamic speakers to make it a part of Islam. Don't make something a part of Islam that isn't from Islam, that Islam didn't come with. Islam didn't give any commentary on it. Don't bring something into Islam that isn't from it. Islam kept the issue of food open with certain regulations and rules, obviously keeping away from the haram and keeping away from filling the stomach and overeating. Other than that, Islam left it open for you. You do what you want and what you feel comfortable with and what works for you, inshaAllah ta'ala, without any particular evidence from the Sunnah that there's a particular diet which is better than another kind of diet. Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. The question continued onwards, I believe it was the same. I guess it's the same. No, maybe it's not the same question. Anyway, it could be from the same person. That they also mentioned issues, and they mentioned that they eat a lot of meat and dairy and some vegetables, and they feel better. But people have said to them that eating meat isn't good Islamically or for our health, as there is an addiction in meat. Again, I think the person has to bring evidence for this. There is a weak hadith that the meat of a cow is a sickness and the milk is a cure. This hadith is not authentic. This hadith is not authentic. I don't know of any hadith that discourages eating meat, specifically, that you should not eat meat or you should not eat a lot of meat. And I don't know any hadith that encourages it, particularly. The Sahaba used to eat meat, radiallahu anhum, when it was available to them. But generally, they didn't used to overeat in anything. And so, maybe the issue here is not what we eat, but how much we eat is a bigger issue. And I think you do whatever you're comfortable with, as long as it is permissible. We had already mentioned the issue of a woman reading Quran on her menses. There's nothing wrong with her reading from a phone, tablet or laptop. But the question here is the ayah of sajda. No, she doesn't have to do the ayah of sajda. She can just continue to read, inshallah. Because the ayat of sujood tilawa, the sujood of tilawa is a sunnah. It's not a fard. It's not fard upon you. So a person doesn't need to make them up afterwards or something like that. Sometimes patients come and they wish to take a tablet to delay their period, either for Hajj or for Laylatul Qadr. From a medical point of view, some of these tablets can carry risk. One tablet can cause people to be more risk of blood clots in the legs and lungs and other complications. Theoretically, taking this tablet during Ramadan when someone's dehydrated and less active would increase this risk further, especially in those who are already overweight. There are alternative tablets which carry less risk, but these need to be taken more times a day, and if the dose is not taken correctly, the person might experience the menses bleeding anyway. Is it acceptable for a person to advise against taking these tablets from a fiqh perspective? Much like when someone gets sick and can't fast in Ramadan, Allah would review their past Ramadan and the virtues would be given accordingly. Would this not apply to the menstruating woman who could pursue other forms of ibadah? Yes, I don't think that there is... Here there are one of two situations. First of all, if the tablet contains or carries a risk to the person's health, then we don't think that the person should be taking that tablet. If the risk is serious, in the medical judgment that the person's risk is, the risk to the person is serious, that they shouldn't be taking this tablet. Because ultimately there isn't a need Islamically to take it. It's a preference. Some people would say, look, the woman would say, I would rather not have my menses in the last 10 days of Ramadan. So if that's possible for a person to take a tablet and it doesn't cause them any other problems, then alhamdulillah. And I think it's suitable on Hajj, because on Hajj the situation can be really quite difficult, because we're not in a situation which we had in the past where a person can remain indefinitely or for a long time in Saudi Arabia after the Hajj is finished. So generally speaking, I think it's a sensible idea to consider it during the Hajj. I don't think that a person should consider it during Ramadan for the reasons that were mentioned. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will write for the person the ibadah that they used to do before that situation, or before the menses started. So a person doesn't need to be taking tablets because of this. But if the person in the doctor's judgment can take the tablet and the tablet doesn't cause them any harm in the doctor's judgment, or the harm is minimal and the risk is minimal, and the patient is happy with that, then it becomes a medical issue, not a fiqh issue. So it's acceptable from a fiqh perspective for the doctor to prescribe those tablets. But the problem is, what happens when it becomes a risk to the person? And the doctor says, look, I think me prescribing you these tablets is risky for you. Then in this case, I don't think the person has an Islamic justification for it. They can simply just do what everyone else always did before these tablets were available. Now, but in Hajj, it can be useful. The problem is, my experience with this in Hajj, going to Hajj, alhamdulillah, almost every year, and as an Islamic sort of religious advisor during the days of the Hajj, the problem that I see is that there is a difference between what would be considered medically stopping a period and what would be considered Islamically sufficient to stop a period. And the Islamic standard is generally higher. So often someone will go to their GP, ask for tablets, and they will take tablets which will cause spotting. But that spotting Islamically is enough to stop the person from praying. So then in that case, it becomes, they end up taking double doses and changing the medication and all kinds of problems like that. So it is important that the person, when they go to their GP, they should, with regard to the Hajj, they really should explain in detail, because the GP, especially if the GP is not Muslim, may not understand that you need a tablet that will give you no bleeding at all, zero, including spotting. And that is going to be a different situation to someone who might the GP might recommend a tablet that just isn't going to do the job. And then it becomes the worst situation. And this is what I wanted to come to, because the person ends up, they took a tablet, the tablet didn't really work. Then they ended up taking more tablets or switching the tablets with their friends and taking their friends' tablets. And then on top of that, it didn't really stop the problem. And then on top of that, when they stop taking the tablet, the period comes in full. And that means that they end up missing even more days from the Hajj or the Ramadan or whatever they were doing. So I think that this is something that a person should be careful about, cautious about, should really think if it's really necessary. And if they do go to the GP and ask for this kind of medication, they should be really clear about what they need, and not just to go to the GP and say, I don't want to have a period for the next 2 weeks because I'm going to Hajj. They should really explain to the GP. And that's true for all medical issues, because often you go to a non-Muslim doctor and they don't understand what you want. For example, you go to the non-Muslim doctor and you ask, can I fast in Ramadan? And the doctor says, well, I don't think you should fast in Ramadan. Is that an Islamic judgment or a medical judgment? Is that a preference? What kind of harm or what kind of concern is that? It's not precise enough. If a person goes to the doctor, they need to go and say, I want to fast in Ramadan. For me, this is extremely important. But if you tell me that it's medically impossible for me to fast, or it's going to cause me severe harm, I'm not going to do it. So you give them some criteria instead of saying to them, do you think I should fast? How is a non-Muslim doctor supposed to answer that question? And under what basis do you think I should fast? Because I never think you should fast. Or I never think it's a good idea for someone with your condition to fast. But is that actually how do we reconcile that with Islam? It's not easy. So I think it's important for a person to be specific on these particular issues. But I would say from the doctor's point of view, if it's going to cause harm, then you have the hadith la darara wa la dirar. There should be no harm caused to anyone. A person who has a continuous problem passing wind, what should they do? If it's continuous all the time in the day, like it's all the way throughout the day, they only need to make wudu for the salah at the time of the adhan, make the wudu and pray however they are. They pray no matter what happens. If they can't, if that's like a medical problem they have. If it only happens for a short time, they can wait until the bout has passed, and then they can go and make wudu and pray normally. But if it's a continuous thing, they just pray as they can. They just pray in the same situation that they're in. Is it permissible to read from a mushaf in other than the Uthmani script? I don't know of any reason why it's not permissible. I don't know of any reason. Maybe if the question was more specific, maybe the person had a more specific example. But I don't think that. I think that, like for example, people get masahif that are written in a script which is easier for people who are familiar with Urdu, for example. There's no harm in that, inshallah ta'ala. I don't see anything, inshallah, wrong in that, and Allah knows best. What does the ayah mean? La ikraha fi din. There is no compulsion in religion. It's an excellent question. And this ayah is an ayah about which there are a number of different opinions. Among the scholars are those who said that this ayah is abrogated, meaning that this ayah, the ruling of the ayah no longer applies. La ikraha fi din, there is no compulsion in religion. And they said that this ayah is abrogated, meaning that the ayah remains an ayah, but the ruling of the ayah no longer applies. And it was abrogated by the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, Inna ad-deena inda Allahi al-Islam, that the religion in the sight of Allah is Islam. Or the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, وَمَنْ يَبْتَغِي غَيْرَ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا فَلَنْ يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ. Whoever wants other than Islam as a religion, it will never be accepted from them. That's one opinion. Another opinion, it says that no, this ayah is not abrogated, but the meaning of compulsion here, is different. And also there are some of the ulama who spoke about it being abrogated by the ayat, or by, for example, by the likes of the hadith, umirtu an uqatil an-nas hatta yashhadu an la ilaha illallah. I was commanded to fight against the people until they testify that there is no God worthy of worship except Allah. So there are broadly two different opinions about the ayah. One is that the ayah is abrogated, and the other is that if we understand the meaning of compulsion correctly, the ayah is not abrogated. And what do we mean by if we understand the meaning of compulsion? So does the meaning there is no compulsion in the religion, does that mean that a person is free to choose another religion besides Islam or not? Or does it mean that a person can only enter into Islam of their own free will? A person can only enter into Islam of their own free will. If a person entered into Islam at a threat of punishment, or entered into Islam in order to save themselves or whatever, it wouldn't be accepted from them. Because in the first place, to accept Islam, it has to be sincerely from you. It has to be something you sincerely believe. So there were those among the scholars who took the ayah that the meaning of compulsion here is that effectively Islam has to be your choice. That doesn't negate the fact of the Prophet ﷺ saying, I was commanded to fight against the people until they testify there is no God worthy of worship except Allah. That doesn't negate that. Because ultimately, whatever the Muslims do or don't do, but you can't be forced, or you can only accept Islam if you yourself are content with it, and if you yourself have chosen that for yourself. So that was, those are broadly the two opinions that I remember. And it's maybe a bit more complicated than that, but those are the two that come to mind. Those are the two opinions that come to mind. One is that it's abrogated and that the ayah no longer applies. The ruling of the ayah no longer applies. And that's in the context that nobody should be, no pressure can be put on someone to accept Islam. They said that that can't be true because after that ayah was revealed, there are examples of the Muslim army going out and them giving them three choices and saying either you become Muslim or either you pay the jizya or either you fight against us, for example. They said, how can you reconcile that with the statement of Allah Azza wa Jalla, La ikraha fi din, there is no compulsion in the religion. Some of the scholars said it's abrogated, the ruling doesn't apply. But I personally hold the view of the second opinion, that the meaning of ikrah here, it's the meaning of compulsion. It doesn't say pressure. Pressure is a different issue. Or, that a person can be encouraged or whatever it might be. But ultimately, you accepting Islam has to be your own choice. You then live with the consequences of not accepting it in this dunya, in the akhirah. But ultimately, you accepting Islam has to be your own choice. It can't be someone else's compulsion upon you. If family members like a parent or wife do not wake up for Fajr, and I try to keep waking them a few times and they don't get up, as the Islamic head of the household, what should I do? They pray other prayers during waking hours. Will I be held responsible for not putting in enough effort to wake them? Or does the responsibility of the adult lie in getting up on their own? I think a person has to do everything that is reasonably possible to get them up. No doubt. A person has to do whatever they can. So I think, you wake them up, splash cold water on them or something, but ultimately you can't drag them out of bed. Ultimately, you have to do whatever is reasonable to get them up. And you have to persist in doing that, inshallah ta'ala. Continue in doing that. Because at the end of the day, if it's someone who you are responsible for, and even if it's not someone you're directly responsible for, like your parents, you're not directly responsible for your parents. But ultimately, you have to command the good and forbid the evil. So you have to do everything you can to get them up for Fajr, whether that's admonishing, talking to them, encouraging them, waking them up, coming back every few minutes and trying to get them up. But ultimately, if they don't answer you, despite your best efforts and you've done everything that's reasonable, then it comes back to them, not to you. But you have to be able to say that you did everything that was reasonable, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. There's a couple of other good questions, but I just wanted to answer them another time, inshallah, because sometimes they need a bit more research. Please, can you do a series on how to perfect the wudu and the prayer? Yeah, this is really needed, subhanAllah. And actually, to be honest, I did get asked to. I'm actually behind on that. I was actually asked to do that for a dawah organization in Dubai, and I'm supposed to provide them the videos for that. So inshallah, it's something it's on that list of projects. What's the ruling on eating from non-Muslim food places which claim to have halal meat? For example, they say our chicken is halal. Can we accept what they say, or is there any further checks we should do, or is it best avoided? I think you can accept what they say as long as you have reason to believe they're telling the truth. Like for example, there's no reason to believe they're going to lie to you. Say our chicken's halal. You could ask them, could you tell me who your supplier is if you wanted to? If you feel that would give you more confidence. But generally, I don't imagine that many people would lie about that. I think if they said our chicken is halal, I don't imagine that they would lie about that usually. But if you don't feel confident in it, or you didn't feel that you don't feel confident in what they said, then maybe you can ask them for further information. Could you tell me who your supplier is if you don't mind? That would be fine, inshallah. It's about whether you feel confident in what they're telling you. Is it problematic to say you were lucky or that was lucky? What can we say when talking to non-Muslims? Yeah, I don't like the word lucky. I don't think a Muslim should use the word lucky. I think it could be understood, or usually it's understood in a way that has issues with regard to al-qadr wal-qada, the decree of Allah, Allah's decree. So I think it's problematic to use that word. What can you say to a non-Muslim though? So someone said that someone crashed into me, my car wasn't damaged at all, or that they dropped a £20 note and they found it exactly where they dropped it. What can you say to them? I don't see any reason why you can't say to them that you are blessed. Like maybe that might make them realize the blessings of Allah. You know, like that maybe that might make them realize the blessings of Allah Azza wa Jalla upon them. You know, you should realize the blessings that you've been given. Wow, that's a blessing. That's a blessing. And maybe that might make them realize the blessings that Allah Azza wa Jalla has given them and make them perhaps accept Islam. So I think that's something you could say. I don't think the word lucky is the right word to use, because it indicates that kind of randomness, right? That it's just something random that happened. It didn't happen because Allah decreed it to happen. It didn't happen because Allah wanted it to happen, but it just happened because you were just lucky and he wasn't lucky. That's why I don't like using that word. And I think people instead should look for another word. And I think anything that you talk to a non-Muslim about, you should always try to introduce Islam in there if you can. Like saying, oh, you know, God really blessed you, or something that would make them think about Islam. But even if you don't want to mention God, then at least just say, you know, that's a real blessing. It's a ni'mah, it's a blessing, and that you should think about that blessing and give thanks for it. It's a very good question about Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, rahimahullah ta'ala. I'm going to deal with that maybe in another session, because we haven't got much time left and I've got a lot of questions, and that one might need a bit more detail. I answered that one already. Can zakah be given in other than cash? No, zakah for money has to be given in money. It can't be given in food or anything like that. Zakah in money has to be given in money. So that's like the zakah for, let's say for example, zakah on your savings. That has to be given in money, and it can't be given in food. But the zakah on crops is given in crops, if that makes sense. Should we read Surah Al-Kahf on a Friday? The scholars differed about whether the narrations about Surah Al-Kahf on a Friday are authentic. Many of them declared them to be authentic. Many of the scholars declared them to be authentic, and some of them said it's not authentic. But even if it's not authentic, reading it once a week is authentic also. So for me, I don't see any problem in reading Surah Al-Kahf on a Friday. And I think that it's a strong argument to say that the actions of the Muslims, this is the, alayhi al-amal, this is what the Muslims do and have almost always done. So I think that there's no issue with reading Surah Al-Kahf on a Friday. Was the Prophet ﷺ created before Adam? They use the first 3 verses of Surah Yasin to say that before Allah made Adam, He said to the Prophet ﷺ that indeed you are among the messengers. So that means the Prophet ﷺ was present before the creation of Adam. And they also say to Adam that his mahar to Hawa was the durud. There is no doubt that Adam was the first human being to be created. And anyone who says that the Prophet ﷺ was created before Adam, they don't have an evidence for this. As for saying in the first three ayat in Surah Yasin, I don't quite follow the argument. Like, the argument doesn't make sense. Is it because after that Allah Azza wa Jal mentions, and to me it doesn't make sense, and I can't understand the reasoning for it, because Allah Azza wa Jal mentions the creation of Adam. For example, in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah mentions the creation of Adam. For example, Allah Azza wa Jal mentions the creation of Adam in Surah Ali Imran, for example. Before that, Allah mentions the Torah and the Injil and the Quran, and Allah Azza wa Jal mentions Islam, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions guidance. Does that mean all of those things existed before Adam? It doesn't really make any sense at all. A person can't speak without evidence. A person has to have an evidence for what they say. And just reciting three ayat from Surah Yasin, it is not an evidence necessarily. I'm still trying to understand the first three. In fact, I'm even going to bring up Surah Yasin here, because I'm thinking, am I missing something? Or I'm trying to understand where the Yasin wal Quran al Hakim innaka lamin al mursaleen. I'm still struggling to understand where Adam comes into that. Innaka lamin al mursaleen, you are one of the messengers. The Prophet ﷺ said, I'm the last of the messengers. Ana akhir al-anbiya, the last of the messengers, the last of the prophets. Where is Adam connected to Surah Yasin? Like, it's really strange. And I'm trying to understand what we call wajh al-istidlal. And what's from where do these ayat have any connection to whether Adam was created first? I don't see any connection to that. Like, a person has to bring dalil. I guess that people will say all kinds of things, but ultimately in Islam you have to have an evidence for what you say. I don't have a problem who Allah Azza wa Jal created first. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of all things, but you can't bring something without an evidence. As for the statement that Adam's mahar was to Hawa was to teach her Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, again, you have to bring a dalil, you have to bring an evidence for that. A person has to bring a hadith, has to bring some kind of chain of narration. That's why if people were left, there's a beautiful hadith that reminds me about this. The Prophet ﷺ, he told us about this particular issue. And let me see if I can find the reference what I was looking for. Yeah, there's a hadith from the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas. And the hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim. That the Prophet ﷺ said, لو يعطى الناس بدعواهم لادعى ناس دماء رجال وأموالهم ولكن اليمين على المدعى عليه ولكن اليمين على المدعى عليه أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. Or he said البينة على المدعي واليمين على من أنكر. The hadith of Ibn Abbas, that if people were given everything by just making a claim, people would take the blood and the wealth of others without right. However, proof is upon the claimant. Al-bayyina al-mudda'i, if someone makes a claim, they have to bring a proof for it. You can't just make a claim and say that Adam's mahar was to teach Hawa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, or Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, for example. Person has to, otherwise people would just take the rights of people left, right and center if you can just make a claim without any evidence for it. So a person has spoken with their family about buying a house, and they want to pay them rent and slowly buy the house off them in installments. And they told their family not to do this via a mortgage. is that is it permissible for me to buy from them? So I think there are two issues here. The first thing is that a person needs to be, it can't be a hidden way of taking a mortgage, where someone knows for a fact that their family is going to go and take a mortgage. They know that their family don't have the resources to buy that house. And then the person says, oh, well, if you don't tell me about it, then, I'll pretend I don't know about it. Well, instead, if the family has agreed and the family has the means to buy a house without the mortgage, then the second issue comes, which is structuring this rental agreement in a way that isn't haram. Because a lot of this concept of ijar, purchasing a house via ijar, is problematic. It needs to be structured in the right way. And that's maybe beyond the scope of this Q&A session. We're going to be finishing very soon. So it might be difficult for me to bring all of the conditions. But it's important that these two things, the rental and the purchase, are considered to be totally separate to one another. That's the first thing. They should not be ingrained in the same contract. And they should be separable, meaning that it should be possible for someone else to rent the house and this person to still continue paying back the installments to buy the house, even when someone else is renting it. It shouldn't be a case that you can only buy back the house while you're renting. It should also be the case that if they're renting, they should be treated as a tenant, not as a person who owns the house. And so they should have the rights of a tenant, not the case that we tell people they're a tenant, but then we don't give them the rights of a tenant. They should have the rights of a tenant, and the normal rules of tenancy that exist should apply to them. But the tenancy should be different from the ownership. There are some other rules as well, but that's some of the most important rules. So it shouldn't just be structured randomly. It should be done quite deliberately in such a way that it complies with Islam. Not like the Islamic banks often do it, where they blend the two together such that you can only buy the house if you continue to rent it and you don't have the rights of a tenant. Praying Eid Salah at home, I'd already dealt with in a video. Okay, it's a very good question, and I've got about 2-3 questions left before we finish, inshallah. We try and finish for 9 o'clock. So, this question says that my mother underlined all the verses that suggest violence in an English translation of the Quran. She's loyal to Catholicism because it's the religion that made her spiritually strong when she was widowed. She raised 9 kids. She seems to be in denial that I'm a Muslim, and how can I deal with this kind of person? First of all, when it comes to dealing with non-Muslim parents, you have to be soft and gentle. You have to be kind, and you should never ever get angry with them or disrespect them in any way. Because Allah Azza wa Jal said, وَإِن جَاهَدَاكَ عَلَىٰ أَن تُشْرِكَ بِمَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. Allah Azza wa Jal said, if they compel you to make a partner with me in that which you have no knowledge of, don't obey them, but accompany them in this world in the best way. So you can't obey them in doing what's wrong, but you still have to be kind and gentle and considerate towards them. As it relates to violence in the Quran, there are a couple of things that I think you need to do. I think first of all, we need to establish that the Quran needs to be taken in the Arabic language. As for the English translation of the Quran, it is still a person's best effort to translate the meaning of the word. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's accurate. So you have to say, even though I know it's not very helpful because the person's going to say, well, I don't know Arabic, so what can I do? But ultimately, you have to allow for the fact that translations may not be accurate. That has to be said. Because otherwise, a person might attribute something to the Quran, which is the translator's opinion and not what the actual Quran says. So that's important to note. So where there's a dispute between you and her about what an ayah means, you have to go back to the actual meaning of the ayah and the Arabic language rather than what the translation says and saying that everything in the translation is completely correct. The second thing is that Islam in itself Islam doesn't call for abolishing all kinds of violence, if that's the right words to use. Islam is not pacifist. Islam isn't a religion that tells you that there should never ever be any kind of what's the word? I think even the word violence is the wrong word, because violence has a negative connotation to it. But whether it be like physical punishment, or whether it be like military activity, or whatever it is, whatever you want to term it, but Islam doesn't class that as being completely negative. And I'll give you a simple example. Allah Azza wa Jal said, وَلَوْلَا دَفْعُ اللَّهِ النَّاسَ بَعْضَهُمْ بِبَعْضٍ لَفَسَدَتِ الْأَرْضِ. If it wasn't for the fact that Allah caused a group of people to check another group, i.e. people fight against each other, and one group stops the other group from overcoming them, the earth would be corrupted. The earth would be corrupted. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ ذُو فَضْلٍ عَلَى الْعَالَمِينَ. But Allah is full of grace to all the worlds. So I don't think it's right to say that Islam looks down upon every act of, if you want to call it violence, or every sort of physical punishment, that Islam looks down on it, or that Islam speaks against it. But everything has its checks and balances, and everything has to be done in the right way. And sometimes I give the example, for example, of, and I don't give this as an example to Muslims, because it's not a very good example from an Islamic point of view, but it's an excellent example for non-Muslims. And that is to talk about, for example, UN peacekeepers. UN peacekeepers who are apparently there to establish the peace, keep the peace between people. How do they keep the peace between people? How do they keep peace between people? Are they there, with, like flowers around their necks and, handing out, I don't know, like cookies or something? No, they're there with guns and tanks and planes, keeping the peace. And if most people can recognize that it's not about the issue of violence or not violence, it's about whether something is done appropriately, in the right way, at the right time. So if you look at acts of extremism, for example, that are done in the name of Islam, they're not done by the right people, in the right place, at the right time, in the right situation, in any way, shape or form. They're completely against everything that Islam stands for. But that doesn't mean that Islam is pacifist, and Islam doesn't call to any kind of if you like, things that people might consider to be violent, or punishments people might consider to be violent, for example. Well, at the end of the day, Islam is about like Allah Azza wa Jalla said, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. We've made you a middle ummah. We've made you in the middle. It's not about extremes. Islam doesn't have extremes in anything. And to me, extreme like examples of pacifism are just as extreme as the other side of, extreme violence and so on and so forth. Neither of those have any place in Islam. Islam is in the middle. Everything has to be done with checks and balances, the right place, the right time. But there is a time for fighting, there is a time for physical punishments, there is a time for, at the end of the day, Islam gives a balance to that. And an example of that, Allah Azza wa Jal said, وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. Allah said, fight against those who fought against you, and don't exceed the limits. And indeed, Allah does not love the people who go over the limits. This to me makes perfect balance, perfect sense. Fight against the people who fought against you. They say fight against innocent people, fight against people who didn't do anything to you, fight against people who are fighting against you, and don't go over the limits. So first of all, Allah Azza wa Jal allowed those people in that ayah to fight against people who are fighting against them. That's the first thing. Secondly, even those people fighting against them, Allah said, don't go over the limits. Don't go too far. Don't go beyond what you're allowed to do. وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا. Don't go over what you've been allowed to do. that makes perfect sense. That to me is not violence. That to me makes perfect sense and is perfectly balanced. So that to me, like I would use examples like that. When Allah said, fight against those people who fought against you and don't go over the limits. That makes perfect sense to me. It's not violent. It's not violence for violence's sake. But it's something which is measured in a proper way, as a proper response, the same way that many non-Muslims would recognize from their own situation, their own, for example, if you talk about, even if you don't want to talk about the military, you want to talk about in civilian life. If someone attacks you and tries to, let's say, stab you or tries to rob you, you're allowed to repel that attack in a way that is reasonable and proportionate to the attack that you were given. If somebody, you're allowed to, if somebody, for example, tries to steal something for you, you're not allowed to pull out a knife and stab them, for example. But you're allowed to do something which is proportionate to what they've done to you. If they've tried to attack you, you're not required to stand there still and just let them beat you up or let them kill you or whatever. You're allowed to repel that violence that they've done towards you with something that is measured and reasonable. And that's the same thing that Islam calls for. فَمَنِ اعْتَدَى عَلَيْكُمْ فَاعْتَدُوا عَلَيْهِ بِمِثْلِ مَا اعْتَدَى عَلَيْكُمْ. Whoever transgresses against you, then transgress against them with the likes that they did to you. And what they're doing to you, repel it back or push back against it in a way that's proportionate and reasonable. So I think that if you look at any ayah in the Quran that could be perceived to be violent, I don't like that word violence, but any ayah that could be perceived or mistakenly understood to be violent, I think you only have to take it in context and you see that there are checks and balances. It's about a specific situation and a specific set of circumstances. And whenever those circumstances exist, the ayah is applied. So it works like that. That's one thing that's how I would take it. As for trying to convince people that Islam is completely, pacifist and doesn't have any concept of sort of physical retribution in any way, then I think that that's a hard sell, to be honest with you. You're probably trying to tell someone something that doesn't really exist in Islam. So it's important to be fair and honest with what Islam says. What's the best response to statements like, you're just a revert, or the true Muslims are those who were known Muslims, who were Muslims centuries ago? That's a really interesting question. I think it depends if that comes from a Muslim or a non-Muslim. I'm going to presume, because the question was talking about a non-Muslim mum, that it probably refers to it coming from a non-Muslim. So I think there's no doubt that the Muslims who understood Islam the best were those Muslims who were around the Prophet ﷺ, his companions. They understood Islam the best. They understood what Islam really is and what Islam really means. And if we implement Islam the way that they did, then inshallah we'll be doing things the right way. I don't know about the statement, you're just a revert. Like maybe the person presumes that because you're new to Islam, you don't know about Islam. But that's not true. Ultimately, everything we say in Islam has to have a proof, right? So if everything in Islam has to have a proof, then it doesn't matter who says it, whether the person's been Muslim 10 years or 1 year or 1 month or 1 week. If they said something and they have a proof for it, then we take it from them. That's why Islam is based upon proof. It's not based upon how long you've been a Muslim for. But I think one of the nicest examples to give for this is the example of the companions of the Prophet. So I said they're considered to be the most knowledgeable of people, right? So you would kind of say to a person, would you agree then, if you say to me that the true Muslims are those who were Muslims centuries ago, would you agree that the best Muslims then are the Muslims who were the companions of the Prophet? They would say, yeah, we would agree. You say, okay, but many of them, in fact, almost all of them, if not all of them, almost all of them, were reverts. They only became Muslim a year before, a month before, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. They were almost all of them, except those who were born in Islam, were reverts. So it's not really a very strong argument to put forward to say to someone, you're just a revert. And generally, when you see someone attacking a person it generally shows that they don't really have an evidence for what they're saying. Because if they had an evidence, they would attack the statement. But when they don't attack the statement and instead they attack the person, it's generally a sign that they don't have a strong evidence or proof to argue their point. Is it allowed for someone who's going to get married, for a woman, to stipulate Hajj as her mahar, taking her to Hajj as her mahar? It's permissible. I don't see any reason why it's not permissible, inshallah. Inshallah ta'ala, I don't see any reason why it's not permissible for her to stipulate him to take her to Hajj as the mahar. But obviously on the understanding that would be as soon as is possible for the person to be able to do that, because it might not be possible for them to do that in the first year of marriage, for example, because of restrictions or visas or whatever. But yeah, it's permissible for him to take it to Hajj to make it a mahar, inshallah. That brings us to the sort of question 200 out of 200. The question is getting more and more out of 273. So I think we can stop there, inshallah ta'ala. Let's just see the questions on the side. You have to forgive me that I'm not really able to read them all as I'm speaking, but I'm just going to go through now. There was a question about niqab. Is niqab obligatory or not? But they wanted all of the evidences for it. Maybe we can give some of the more details next time. But yes, I believe the niqab is obligatory. That's my personal opinion, that it's obligatory, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. And we can maybe talk about more of the evidences if we get time next time, inshallah. Okay, that was fine. Okay. So there's a very good question about the best way to seek knowledge. I will try to answer that in the next session, inshallah, because it's going to be difficult, I think, to answer in detail right now. Let me just see if I can copy this question. I've got a list of questions that I haven't answered, to be honest, so inshallah I'll do my best to answer them next time. Is it true that suffering from anxiety and depression is because of a lack of iman? No, I don't think it's true that anxiety and depression is necessarily from a lack of iman. I don't think that's true. I think that it's more complicated than that. And I have a video about it. If you search for Muhammad Tim, anxiety and depression, or Muhammad Tim, depression, I have a video about it, inshallah. Someone was asking about myself, what Islamic studies have you done and where have you studied? That's a good question. I think it's important. You should ask that question if you don't know the person who is speaking, because some of the Imams said, إِنَّ هَذَا الْعِلْمَ دِينٌ فَانْظُرُوا عَمَّنْ تَأْخُذُونَ دِينَكُمْ. This knowledge is your religion, so be careful who you take your religion from. So I'm your brother in Islam, Muhammad Tim Humble, and I graduated from the Islamic University of Medina. And I was in Medina from 2004 until 2011, and then after that I was in Riyadh. And then after that I had some chances to study from different scholars in different places in the world, a small amount in Egypt and a little bit of time in the UAE and some other places, alhamdulillah. So that's what Allah Azza wa Jalla made easy for me to mention. And maybe if you look me up on YouTube or something, you can find out more information about some of those things, inshallah. So inshallah ta'ala, we can stop it there. There was some really good questions, especially that question on seeking knowledge that came from on the side. I will inshallah do my best to answer that in the next week's session, inshallah ta'ala. We're not doing a very good job of keeping up with the questions because they're getting more and more every time, but alhamdulillah, we just do our best, inshallah, to go through as many as we can. That's what Allah made easy for me to mention, and Allah knows best. Wassalatu wassalamu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.